Come on, keep moving, dog. Are you getting in on this? Gosh. This is what they used when they were bringing the ice in from the field. The one man would stand alongside the trough, and he would be pulling the ice in to keep it going, and what it would come in is, and as they got in, it had a conveyor that would take the ice up into the house, because it was in offshore, and they would bring it up into the house, and then they would stack it, you know, so many stacks high, until they filled the house up. Before the war, there were all the ice houses all along the river. Knickerbocker ice houses down where the tower dock is, where the towers were built. Down below towards Catskill, there was a big one. They take and come bring up and barge it down to New York. Back in the days when, you know, in the 20s and 30s. When I was a little kid, I remember my mother taking me down to the river, and they had night boats that used to go to New York. And they were loading barrels of apples. And then for the brickyards, they came in and they loaded the bricks and the barges, and the tug would come in and tow them to New York. The ferry was here. There was no bridge until the 30s. So the ferry was the main thing. In fact, when I was a kid, they had a great big ferry. And when the war broke out, then they took it away and they sent us back to a little 6-carp job. My father was a lighthouse keeper. They told him, well, here you are. If you want to stay in the lighthouse service, this is where you're going. So he came here, being that he had 3 children, and that was 1930, and he moved here, and when everything was falling apart in the world back then. I was born on the lighthouse in 1933, and that doctor had to go get Dr. Cooper and row him out, and I was. It was how can I say, a sedate life. You didn't have a lot of things you could do. There was quite a bit of shipping on the river at that time. It was during the war, and they had to maintain the light, and and maintain the fog belt. So if anything, any kind of inclement weather or anything. But we always walked on the ice years ago. We ice skated on the river. We used to walk out to see my father, take him out to mail when we could. And when he used to walk back and forth, we always knew it was safe, because he chewed tobacco, and when he would spit on the ice, we could find the brown spots and follow him across. And you always carried a pole. That's one thing they taught you, is because if you fell through, you could always put the pole across the hole so you could get out. Where we're standing right now was all dug out for a brickyard. The brickyard sits over there where my sister's place was. This was an original brickyard. This whole area here was dug out. The clay was dug out. When I was a kid, there was just the brickyard was up where the boat launch site is today. Was under the Athens Brick Company, ABC. Before that, it was Mayone Brick Company. You'd see NBC with a little O. You'd see Mayone straight letter. You'd see Mayone with a slant letter. Oh, these are from Ravenna. These bricks were made the SSBCO. That was Powell-Medic. You'll also see them with like this with a P&M on them. You see, that was Powell-Medic. That's up where down on the lower part of Ravenna, in the Queensbridge place going up, where the cement plant has bought a lot of that land. Like here, this is a Ryder Brick. This is when the Ryder Brick Company, and then that was Upper Village. This is ABC Brick, Athens Brick Company, and then let's see. Here's a Mayone slant. So a lot of this brick I have, like these brick, they're very similar, but they're have no names, and they're probably even older than that. In fact, you can see hunks of they mixed it. They mixed stone and everything in those days. The brick, like a brick, here's like this is a G and G, Gladfelter and Gladfelter. And they actually, the brick would be molded, this would be face down, and there would be like 5 or 6 of them in a tray. And they put the clay in there, and then this design was in the bottom, so that when they would put them in a drying rack, and when they dried, they'd tip them out and take them, and then they'd stack them in the kiln. Different people, when they're redoing stuff, and they want to brick it from the age of where they are. In fact, I had a man come in, he wanted to put a walk in, and he got all the bricks, you know, with the names. These are artifacts from where the pottery that was here in the village. And I always pick these pieces up. In fact, I have a bucket or so of them. I can show you that. Let's see where. See, they're all different shapes. See, and this seems like a full-size one. And what I would say that they were, to me, from working on ceramics with my wife, I would say is they probably broke them in half to see whether the pottery was completely, you know, cured. The shipbuilding, when I was a kid, was that was on its way out. They used to, down where the ELCO is now, there used to be right where the main office building is down there. There used to be the ways went out into the water, and they used to bring the barges in and bring them in and caulk them. They used to be, you know, with the oakum, they'd be set there and they'd pound it in with and they'd seal the barges. That's the way they sealed them in the old days.
I'm Chuck Houghton, the president of the Electric Launch Company, which we consider a 113-year-old startup here in Athens, New York. On this site, they started building boats in 1706. So we're coming up on 300 years of boat building tradition. That's very unusual in America. The first boat builders here were the Van Loon family, and they built river boats. The biggest boat that they built was the Catskill, which was 282 feet long, built right on this site in 1880, I believe, 1885. We've been building electric-powered boats since 1892. We introduced them to America at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, and they were a sensation. Really was a way of changing the way people use our waterways. Instead of polluting gasoline engines, we can have silent, non-polluting electric motors. These boats, which you can see in the background, are very similar to the boats that we built 113 years ago. The technology's improved, the batteries are better, instead of electrical, they're electronic, state-of-the-art computers, microprocessors are used to control the boats. But the look is the same. It's an Edwardian classic launch. When people thought about going out on waterways, lakes and rivers and Long Island Sound, Chesapeake Bay, wherever we have boats, to just talk and visit and look at the scenery and connect with nature instead of overpowering it. It was a part of nature. It's a very different concept. That concept is now coming back. I don't know how to build a boat, but I have very skilled people who build the boats, and they're the assets of the company. We were very lucky. 68,000 square feet, right on the Hudson River. We have 800 feet of shoreline. We can launch the boats right next door. It's just been a major improvement for the business to be here on the water. The motor is about 4 horsepower, and as you can see, it's about 14 inches long, about 6 inches in diameter, and weighs about 50 pounds. So the charging process, it takes about an hour for every hour you use the boat. The batteries can operate the boat for 11 or 12 hours. Few people, I think, in America today realize that electric technology was way ahead of gasoline engine technology. The French had invented the electric boat in 1840, 20 years before the American Civil War. There were no gasoline engines. In 1900, there were more electric cars in New York City than there were gasoline. Henry Ford comes along and popularizes the automobile, and of course, the interest in gasoline engines just took off. Electricity in America right now is very inexpensive, and we can operate one of our boats for 10 or 11 hours on about 50 cents worth of electricity. Most people who buy our electric boats are buying them because they're quiet. That's the primary reason. They like to be on the boats, have conversations with friends, and have it quiet, silent. The batteries and electric motors don't pollute the waterways. A two-stroke gasoline outboard, 1/3 of all the oil and gas that goes in the front end of the outboard comes out the back end, unburned, unused, pure pollution. Everybody's seen an outboard turn on and you have that big blue cloud and the gas spurting over the water. It's just horrible. Fresh water is our most precious resource. We have to protect it.
Oh, we had a great time in Kingston. We had 4 music performances, we had 1 concert, we had several open hours, a couple of camp groups come through, and all told, we just had a great time.
For us, this waterfront is just incredible. And to be here and seeing all the other barges, boats of every sort coming by, having them wave to us, toot at us, shout at us, spurt water at us. It really gives you the feeling more of being on a waterfront, a live waterfront. And I think that was really what inspired this voyage to come upriver.
Watching all the recreational boaters go by here on the Rondout Creek. There are so many weekend boaters that use their boats here, just back and forth. It really was a water highway. Just having the parade of recreational boaters go by was really wonderful. Seeing our crew come together, all the circus performers, it's been a great couple of weeks.
grandfather started working here in 1900, and he bought in, and his brother-in-law bought the business in 1912. And my father used to use this, it's called a winter eel spear. The old timers pretty much knew where they would bed down, and they'd dig a hole in the ice and probe this into the mud and pull the eels out and harvest them for eating. They'd smoke them and eat them. The eel would slide up into here, and then on the way out they'd be gigged on the hook. And you know, 50, 60, 70 years ago, when people needed to put food on the table, they would, you know, and then the eel, I guess, was a pretty good eating thing. So some people lived on this stuff. I mean, this is an ice saw for harvesting ice, which was a big business here in the wintertime, up until they started making ice commercially in the 20s. And then before that, they would cut ice and they'd barge it to New York City and whatever city needed ice at the time, or whoever bought the ice at the time. And this is one of the saws they used. These are also built for moving ice in the water and pushing it even on, when, you know, sliding it. After they cut the ice, they would float the ice over to a place where they would take it out and move it with these. This is a grain shovel or a snow shovel. There's a neater one up on the wall there. There's a commercial bracket that you would sell. Then the person would make their shovel. They would come in and buy that little bracket and go back and make their shovel. There was no commercial fishing. There was some shad fishing in the spring. If people were fishing on the river, were fishing for food for the table. Duck hunting was also done for food. It wasn't done for recreation so much. I mean, people enjoyed doing it, but it was they were putting food on the table, and especially during the Depression, when food was tight, scarce. I mean, and expensive. They subsisted on their vegetable gardens and their whatever they could hunt or fish, and bought some things obviously, but it was more a subsistence thing. This is a duck boat. The fellow's name was Brunner, and he had a small boatyard on the Catskill Creek where the Catskill Marina is now, and he would make these boats on order, probably 2 or 3 a winter. He made his last ones around early 1920s. It had to be well made because it withstood a lot of abuse. And he couldn't make enough of them. I mean, he could only make 2 or 3 a winter, and they were all spoken for. I've got a picture of my father and my brother and I back in the 50s in a boat very similar to it. They had what they call a battery that went across the front, and what it consisted of was a board that sat in these 2 holes, and you put grass in those holes, and then you sat back here, and you sat on the floor in that seat, and then the person in the back sat on the rear deck and paddled you along. And then, if you were in those days, where you went across the flats, the grass wasn't that thick, and you would actually stand up in the back of the boat and push yourself with this paddle. The decoys we weren't using when you were creeping. You would use those at your duck blind. You would put them out in an area, and then when the ducks landed in the decoys, you would creep up on them with this. You'd be hunkered down in the back with a little paddle like this and try to sneak up on them. These actually are Mason decoys. This company went out of business in 1924, and they're very collectible. The age, the painting, the detail. It's been varnished though, and that sometimes detracts from the value actually. When they first started making decoys, they didn't have to it didn't have to look like so much. It had to look like a duck, but didn't have to because there were so many ducks that it didn't really matter. I mean, the looks of the duck. But what happened was the carver took more pride in his work, and I think the original carvers became artists over the years because they just liked it to look better. And they would look at the duck and try to make it look more like a duck. I mean, today's contemporary carvers mostly have an art background. They're artists first and then become carvers.
What's interesting about this house is so many people say to us, how is the little house going? And I always say, what little house? Because from the front of the road, the present front of the house, you see the stone house, and it's hard to put together all the parts that make the entire building. If we look at these series of attached buildings here, this small red building with a steep roof predates the stone house and was probably 1715 or thereabouts. Then sometime around the Revolutionary War, they built this red and white building that you see on the south end, and sometime in the late 19th century covered the porch.
So originally it faces the river, which is how people would come in. You would have a dock, you would come out of the boat, because road transportation was difficult, but river transportation was relatively simple. Slow, but simple.
The Hudson Valley, even though it was settled by the Dutch, became English, but certain traditions persisted. So there are houses that were built in what would be called the Dutch style long after the English were already the rulers. Jan Van Loon, who was one of the original patent holders for this area, hence the name Lonenburg for what is now Athens. He had several children, and the first house was at the southern end of town. And this son moved less than a mile away and started building his house. And that also brings us to why we think the initial temporary dwelling was built around the time of Albertus's marriage. When we pulled the wall off, we uncovered original clapboards. Some of them are replacement, but extremely early replacements. But it had not seen the light of day for at least 170 years. This is one building, and this is another building. But you can see that it wasn't built as an integral building. It wasn't built at the same time. Do you see right up there the AVL 1724 with a cross? No one knew about this date stone. This was the original stone house, this room. This was a house where the gable was in a different direction than it is now. It had the steeply pitched roof that you would see in a picture of Amsterdam or New Amsterdam. The entrance to the room was here. There was a jambless fireplace, which was the type of a fireplace that you would see in a Flemish painting that you could stand in, that would have a crown molding and a little curtain on top. We will be taking down this ceiling, because this ceiling is a later ceiling, this plaster ceiling. Well, we've seen from upstairs, because we've lifted up some of the floorboards, and we have seen that the condition of the beams are beautiful Dutch hone beams, which is, the Dutch were very, very particular. This became just another room because the second part of the stone house was built. So the whole usage of this room changed. Before, it was the entire house. I mean, you would be sleeping, you would be eating, you would be having your children here, you would be receiving guests here. Now, with another room, life was changing and use of rooms was changing. But styles had changed, and what's here now is more reflective of the British.
So this is a clearly British room with Georgian paneling from mid-century, mid-18th century, essentially. And the mantelpiece that's also very high style. And the idea is to emulate your political masters.
And as you can see in this room, which is a little bit later, you can see that the surface of the beams is very finely honed. And this was a very particular desire of the Dutch, to have a very beautifully smooth down,
As well.
and the bottom of the floor as well. This is a much later bed. We just happened to have it. There might have been a bed up here. People might have slept on mattresses on the floor. There's handwriting of a little, it looks like a little girl on the inside of that door. Maybe children slept up here. It would have had all sorts of uses. So much material was reused on a building like this. Things weren't as disposable. People were thrifty. It's fascinating what you find, and I think most old homeowners with old houses will find many materials reused in many different ways.